All right, so I'll tie it to Aristotle's text, then we'll get into Bernard Rayleigh's text to further flesh out a few more things and to demonstrate that what I've been explaining so far is in keeping with virtue ethics. Um, Aristotle very concerned about the theoretical matching the practical and the actual living it out and the application of it. Um, every art, every scientific inquiry, similarly, every action and purpose may be said to aim at some good. Hence, the good has been well defined as that which all things aim against good is happiness. Right? And it's interesting. He starts with art, because in some ways, this ethical theory is kind of artsy. It's kind of artistic, right? It's not a scientific formula. It's not a mathematical formula to figure out the right thing to do. It's very subjective and artistic, right? Again, this practice, 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 right? Continually getting, never mind, just practicing, right? Knowledge of the good is of great importance, but only for the conduct of life. It's got to be a theoretical, not just, or practical, not just theoretical. Where does he say it? Men's conception of the good or of happiness may be read in the lives that they lead. Right? This conduct of life that demonstrates and shows and reveals who you are and what you consider happiness to be. If I tell you, oh, happiness for me, I receive such internal joy and peace when I spend time with my children. And you watch me for a week and I find every excuse possible to not spend time with them, I'm either lying to you or I'm lying to myself because I'm showing you through my actions. Spending time with my kids is not that important, so it sure as heck can't be my idea of happiness. Right? This conduct of life thing goes on. Where is it? Here it is. A man who does not delight in noble acts is not good. Right? So just because you're performing the action does not necessarily mean that it's reflective of who you are yet. So I think about criminals who are, rather than sentenced to jail time, they're instead sentenced to serve the community service hours. And so I imagine, someone who's forced to perform community service versus someone who's choosing to perform community service. Choosing to because it necessarily reflects who they are. And I wonder, so if someone comes to the soup kitchen and there's someone there who's doing community service hours, someone who's there because it reflects who they are, is the service going to be different, the service that they receive? Aristotle would say, yeah. The one who's forced to be there, his character is still going to come through. His character is still going to be demonstrated, even if he's performing the same actual physical action as the other person. But the whole idea of community service at all, and sentencing people to that, is based on a virtue ethics claim that people can change. They just need enough practice. They need to put in enough hours to do it. Be surrounded by different types of folks, such that maybe after the 120 hours that they'd probably been dreading, man, can I get this over with already? Maybe a new character is beginning to be formed. Maybe new habits are starting, such that maybe they go for hour number 121 even though they don't have to. Perhaps they're forming friendships, right? New types of peer pressures or something along those lines. I don't know. Small pieces of good fortune or the reverse do not turn the scale of life one way or the other. So again, if you're happy, something displeasing happened, you're still happy. Joy and peace and all that stuff. Even though you may be displeased by the event. But again, you're not allowing external circumstances to determine whether you're happy or not. It's an internal thing instead. So the lottery won't make you happy. Deficiency and excess are both fatal. Has to do with particular circumstances. This is why it's so hard to be good. Again, he's admitting it's grievous and toilsome. But it's worth it in the end, he says, because of the reputation, because of the reward that comes with it. Remembered for being a good guy, the legacy that you leave, right? And it's interesting because Aristotle here says it's why goodness is rare, praiseworthy, and noble. What he's talking about is like saint type stuff, like really, really extraordinarily good, right? Because Aristotle also says, look, even though we tend toward extremes, even though finding the mean is hard, especially in something subjective like this, trying to figure out what your notion of happiness is difficult. Trying to think about how your character is being reflected and how that's developing and so forth, that's difficult. In spite of all of that, still, most of the time, most folks are pretty ethical. Maybe not statue worthy, but most folks, for the most part, good people instead of jerks, usually. Right? It's amazing. So Bernard Bailey, then, you should tie to the text that you actually read. There's like this primacy of character, it's from within, this unity of mind and will and emotions, and again, really that boils down to the mind, the intellect deciding to put these things into alignment. Right? Experience teaches us people tend to do what comes most naturally to them. And again, this is second nature that's been developed and practiced, habit formed. What would a virtuous person do? So that's the role model stuff again. But again, you're determining what a virtuous person would do based upon your own conception of what virtuous is. Top of page 226, there's an interesting statement here by Bernard Rayleigh. This doesn't turn virtue theory into a type of moral subjectivism. Although it allows for a range of right actions, it doesn't allow anything at all to be morally acceptable. While several options might be right, others can still be wrong. Thus, it's appropriate to treat virtue theory as an objectivist theory. Nevertheless, there's no denying that its several right choices feature distinguishes virtue theory from principle-based theories in an intriguing way. I think there should be more question marks instead of periods in this paragraph. Perhaps it does turn into some type of moral subjectivism. Perhaps virtue ethics really isn't that different ultimately from something like cultural relativism or individual relativism. Those are open questions, right? Perhaps this returns us back to some type of Garden of Eden stage where you're, well, here's where everyone's going to think about my character, so I guess this is the thing I should do, even though it doesn't actually form the inner character bit. They really are just kind of going through the motions rather than allowing those motions to impact and change you on the inside. But you're just faking it. You're not faking it until you make it. You're just continuing with the faking. And eventually, Aristotle thinks that real character will be revealed. Eventually. Maybe it is subjectivist. I don't know. Things you need to think about. Draws this distinction on 227 between the intellectual virtues and the moral virtues. I'm not sure there's really that big of a difference. Aristotle draws the same distinction in his text. I'm not sure there's really that big of a difference. Because the way that you're learning these teachable things is through practice. It's an intellectual moral, plus the moral is based on the intellect anyway because of this rational part of the soul. So I'm not sure that distinction is really that valuable for us. Characters can change, but it is hard. It is hard. Reform is hard. Possible, but hard. And the older you get, the more difficult it is. The longer you've been doing the habit, the more difficult it is to break and change. The earlier you were, the younger you were when you started, the more difficult it is to break. There's a lot of factors working against you. And the moral luck, and this is the only place for moral luck, the moral luck that comes with what family, life situation were you born into. Again, it can be overcome, but it's hard. Real hard. But it can happen. You can be reformed. Your behavior can be corrected. We may not do it the right way, but it's possible. This is virtue ethics. The right purpose, right time, right way, right person, so on and so forth. Aristotle cautions the right balance won't be exactly the same for everyone, like I talked about. Just as the quality of food needed by an athlete in training is very different from what a sedentary 60-year-old with a desk job requires. Every individual's character and circumstances are unique, so it's possible for different persons in the same situation to respond differently, although both respond with equal virtue. This is one of the things that leads some to say that virtue ethics is not nearly demanding enough. That it does kind of allow too many right options, so you never really know what the right thing to do is. It's actually not particularly helpful. It's not a good prescription. Others will say that that same notion, that same insight, actually makes it too demanding because it places too much of the emphasis back on you to decide. Like, oh man, what type of character am I trying to build? Wait, which virtue am I trying to cultivate right now? So the same issue could make it too demanding or not demanding enough. It could be the real strength of it, or it could be a real weakness. And this is holistic. We're talking about the whole person here. Good guy or jerk at the end. Which notice then is somewhat like moral nihilism. Talking about the whole person at the end, successful or not successful. Maybe I should pull up that chart again. Right. So where we've come from, right, we've got results or intentions, reason or feeling, society or meta-societal, person or act. Right, so we had nihilism, and then the ethical ramifications of nihilism, cultural relativism, individual relativism. Now we've got virtue ethics. I'm also going to have to get a bigger board if I keep putting all these up every time. So remember, nihilism, ethics is stupid. The ramifications of that then, the results are what matter. We're looking at the entirety of the person, successful or unsuccessful. It's meta-societal, winners judge winners, not society. And it's feelings, right? These internal drives and stuff. Cultural relativism, individual relativism, question marks all the way down, except for who determines. For cultural relativism, it's society. For individual relativism, it's meta-societal. I'm rushing through this part quickly because I already went over this part before. This is just a quick review. So we can get to virtue ethics. I told you it's the entirety of the person. Good guy or jerk at the end. We're talking about ethical and unethical people. And it's determined when you die, because that's when your character's not changing anymore. And really it's determined a little bit after you die, because there are some ongoing projects that you didn't finish. And those ongoing projects that you didn't finish also reflect and reveal your character. And so we kind of have to see how those things play out, because you were such an integral part of those projects. Like, for instance, my kids. I'm kind of an integral part of that project of these kids. So if they turn out to be jerks, that does reflect poorly upon me. Did they eventually make decisions for themselves? Of course, but I was there at the beginning. Those habits, those practices at the beginning, helping to mold them and to guide them. In some way, if they all three end up jerks, guess who failed? The parents. Because it didn't give them the proper tools so that they could succeed and be good people. Society or meta-societal, again, society determines my character at the end. Big town hall meeting, we take a vote. That's who I was. That's why teacher evaluations are so important. That's why colleges care what the students think about the teachers. If every student thinks I suck, then guess what? I suck. Is it reason or feelings? We talked about that. It's reason-based. You're asking yourself a series of questions. What to say about my character? Which virtues am I trying to cultivate? That's an intellectual thing. Is it results or intentions? It's results. That's all society sees. When determining my character, you all don't know what my intentions are. I may tell you, but again, I could be lying either to you or to myself. Right? I take myself to be a fair, but admittedly difficult grader and assessor of your work. My intention in doing so is to make you a better student, to prepare you for college and for life after college, to require you to think a bit more deeply, a bit more critically, to be able to articulate more precisely. Others see that as, some students see that as, oh man, you just don't like me. Some students see it as, oh, you're being overly harsh or overly critical. This is just an intro class. You're being to this or to that you're tending toward excess. I have other students who, after the course is over, or towards the end of the course, say, you know what, I hated the exams, but thank you. Was it painful? Was it tedious? Was it grievous? Was it toilsome throughout? Yes, it was. But my level of understanding of this material is far superior than my friend who went to a different college or had a different professor for this class. I can talk about it in a way that they can't, because I already have. That's what the exams are. So my level of understanding is deeper. I understand virtue ethics, for instance. My friend filled in blanks on a paper, crammed the night before. Not as grievous and toilsome, also not as lasting. Perspective matters. Perspective matters. So that's why you have to take this cumulative perspective of everyone into consideration when determining things like character. Get into the mean talk on 228, talk about this role that society plays on 229. And so again, sometimes society does play a role in determining who a role model should be. Right? You hear about the YouTube influencers, right? They're influencing, they're attempting to be role models. Teachers attempting to be role models and mentors. American Idol. An idol is someone to be followed and emulated. That's what an idol is. It's a thing to follow. A thing that points to something else that you should be following. Stands in for. You follow people on Facebook. Follow them. Or Twitter or whatever it is, whatever those things are that you follow people. You follow them. Why do you follow someone? Because you want to be like them. I think it's interesting. Following and befriending. These two huge, massive philosophical concepts, especially with regards to ethics, especially with regards to virtue ethics. And we throw them around like they don't really have much meaning anymore. Oh yeah, they're my friend, but they're just my Facebook friend. So why even use the word friend? Friendship goes deeper than that. Friends shape one another. If your Facebook friend isn't shaping you and you're not shaping them, then you're not actually friends. Sorry, I got a bit loud and obnoxious about that one. Sorry. 229. Responsibility never falls entirely upon each person alone. Again, this balance. Just like the balance between excess and deficiency. The balance between self's role and society's role in this. Between self's role and parents' role. Between self's role and friend's role. Balance. Again, this grayness, this balance, the great strength and the great weakness of this theory. Never falls entirely upon each person alone. The social environment also exerts a powerful influence upon the development of individual virtue and vice. A healthy society should, now this is Berner and Rayleigh commentary, a healthy society should promote virtue by creating a limited number of good laws under virtuous leadership. Bad laws, too many laws, poor leadership, on the other hand, make virtue harder for anyone to develop. Aristotle sees that developing virtue is both an individual and social responsibility. Aristotle says the second most important job, second only to parents, political leaders. Because political leaders should be the role models for everybody else. That we should want to emulate them. They should be leaders. That's what a leader is. They should be a leader. Sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Maybe it never was. But it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Back to the Ring of Gyges stuff. We're not surprised. It's a ho-hum. Oh yes, of course, another public official busted for some unethical thing. Obviously. We should be outraged, right? If leaders were actually leaders, we should be outraged because we should expect more from them. Instead, we've expected less because they failed us so frequently. Because they're not living up to Aristotle's notion of what it means to be a political leader. Again, he's very much in keeping with Buddhism in a lot of ways. There's another Eastern philosophy, Taoism, which has the example of a leader being like a wind across the grass. That it's not a matter of smushing the grass down, some type of totalitarian thing. No, it's a matter of the good leader living a good, virtuous life and everyone else wanting to follow that as well. So they're a leader by example instead of by laws. These virtues, you can find a list of virtues online somewhere, I'm sure. Values.com has an interesting list of things that they value, that they think all the rest of us should be valuing. So that's a website to check out, values.com. And be thinking, if you read the list, of how that could either an excess or deficiency in it becoming vicious. Another interesting website to check out is if you go through all these lists of like the happiest countries, and notice how many of them like soccer. To go back to Ann Coulter, that was just kind of a joke, but seriously though, most of the happy countries are also soccer-loving countries. They're playing the happiness thing, community, and so on and so forth, instead of individual, like Ann Coulter talked about. And then I'll probably send you the link to this last one. It's an article written by David Brooks, who's another political pundit, talking head type person, also happens to be on the right side of, not the correct side necessarily, in the right-left distinction, the right side of the aisle. And really is writing kind of a virtue ethics editorial here for the New York Times, and really talking about virtue. He wants to draw the distinction between eulogy virtues and resume virtues, and emphasizing the eulogy virtues, which are really the same virtues that virtue ethics is talking about. The resume virtues are the ones that lead to things like success, like nihilism we want to talk about, right? So it's an interesting contrast. He's an older gentleman, so there'll be a reference to Kennedy in here, a reference to Eisenhower. And so I do want you to kind of take a look at that and read it through the lens of ethics, through the lens of virtue ethics, and really a discussion between virtue ethics and nihilism. Because all the stuff that Brooks is talking about, the nihilist or Nietzsche would be like, are you kidding me? Like, what a loser to think this way. Loser mentality. I picture Nietzsche reading this thing with his head in his hand for most of it, and there's one part, and you'll probably know it when you read it, which part I'm talking about, where he'd probably be like this. Disgusting. Disgusting, the stuff that Brooks is talking about. He's going to invert the 7 habits of highly effective people. Because if we're doing the happiness thing, that does invert effectiveness. It inverts and reverses productivity and success. So in a lot of ways, notice, Nietzsche inverts traditional Judeo-Christian values, at least as he sees them, to then give us the success and effective values. Brooks then comes along and inverts and reverses the effective values. Brooks, I think, thinks that's a return to Judeo-Christian values, whatever. Okay, I talked last time about religion, ethics, and all that. Okay. Yeah. So I think that pretty well covers virtue ethics. Obviously, there's much more to be said about it, but I don't want to go overboard with any of these theories. Right? The idea is to give you enough that you understand it, so that you can apply it, so that you can figure out what's strong and weak, figure out which pieces you could use for your own ethical theory that you're then living out. Right? And I could draw from tons more examples, and if you need those, then let me know, and I can give you tons more examples. I think that pretty well covers it, and I'll see you next time.